Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
John, I'm going to say this right up front so I don't mix it up later into the segment we're going to do. If you're listening live, thank you on the air, on streaming. We appreciate that. But if you're listening to this on delay, in other words, it's been time forwarded to your YouTube channel, we would appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button and smash that notification button.
Just
How's it?
smash it, bruh.
Smash it. Okay. Tim Eby, give me the rest of the story.
Well, so I didn't dive into this, and Tim didn't link on his – I should say that I saw this on the platform formerly known as Twitter, a.k.a. X. Tim Eby is talking about the fact that I guess the University of Missouri is saying that it is immune from certain lawsuits because of the fact that it's the university system. So that's the gist. And I don't think Tim linked to an article, so I didn't click and I didn't read it. But Tim's been tweeting about this for the last few days. I assumed actually, Brad, that – because I know you know him and because I know you follow this stuff closely, that maybe you knew a little bit more about this.
I don't know him. I talked to him one time on the phone a long time ago. Hold on a minute. Once again, he was the general manager of KWMU, St. Louis Public Radio, and he sort of got the same fate that Patty Wente did, where the newsroom essentially mutinied against him, and I believe they made some accusations that he was a racist. Wasn't that part of the deal?
Well, yeah, but everybody's a racist.
Well,
yeah, and I think part of it was inextricably linked to Don Marsh, I believe, too, Brad.
Well, the whole crazy weird thing is that, like, you know, once again, the Don Marsh issue is one of these things where I guess I should retell the Don Marsh story.
Yeah, I think because probably a lot of folks that maybe are in Jeff City or DC don't know what happened with Don Marsh and how ridiculous the whole thing is.
By the way, can I tell you something weird? Don Marsh, not his visibly or his image, but his voice is in one of my favorite all-time movies, which actually was a very, very successful movie. Do you know what? This is like
No, I don't. I'm not familiar with this.
Okay, Steven Seagal. Probably most of Steven Seagal's movies are a little bit on the cheesy side, okay? But the movie that I think that he got the most recognition for, which I think did the best box office, and still is an excellent movie if you want to go watch it, it's called Under Siege.
Yes, I remember Under Siege.
Right, and Under Siege is interesting for a number of different respects because of the fact that it takes place on the battleship Missouri, which is another interesting little historical sidelight. And at the beginning of the movie, they're talking about the fact that the Missouri battleship is being retired and it's going for one last voyage or whatever you call it, or mission or whatever like that. And the video starts off with this celebration in, of all places, Pearl Harbor, and Don Marsh is giving like the voiceover like a news guy, which he is. And I don't know how in the world he got that job, but he's talking about, and the Missouri was featured in the world. Matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, if I think I'm correct on this, the surrender document by the Japanese was signed on the deck of the Missouri.
It was.
Okay,
it absolutely was.
So a very historical vessel, okay, which I believe is somewhere still in preservation or something like that. Okay, so Don Marsh, who was a very, very, very well-respected journalist, and I use that word because I do believe he was of sort of like the old school version of the TV people, was on TV here locally for a long time. And then they hired him at KWMU to do the noon show, and I think he did an absolute positive, excellent job with the show. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe, and I didn't listen all the time, but yeah.
Yeah, he did a great job with it. Okay, so one of the additions of the show is he invites his old quote-unquote nemesis, because this was back in the day when the TV news wars were hot and heavy. Go, and if you don't believe me, watch Anchorman, where they literally have the TV Anchorman wars. So he invites his old nemesis, Karen Foss onto the show. And before the show went on the air, as the story goes, she walks into the studio and he says something like, "Wow, you look great." Wasn't that the quote?
Yeah, either you look good or you look great.
You look great. So one of the young, super liberal left-wing producers is in the studio going, "Oh my God, that's a sexually demeaning comment." So she goes and lodges a formal complaint with management that Don Johnson, or not Don Johnson, he's another guy, that anyway, he's essentially, is that sexual discrimination or what is that?
Yeah, and I have the quote pulled up here, Brad.
Okay.
A talk show producer named Evie Hemphill, who heard the remark. I guess there were two folks, the Karen Foss interview, so Don Marsh's interview with his old nemesis went a little longer, and two guests were waiting. And this woman, Evie Hemphill, overheard Don Marsh say that, quote, "A pretty woman always takes precedence." Like, hey, I'm here with my friend Karen, and a pretty woman always takes precedence. So in her email, Evie Hemphill wrote that making comment about a woman's appearance in a workplace setting might be commonplace, but it's pretty baffling to me. Outside of settings akin to a beauty pageant, I just don't see a place for it. So, that was one of the things, Brad.
Didn't he also
and point out too what Karen Foss's reaction was to the hubbub?
Well, didn't he also say, "Boy, when she walked into the studio, boy, you look great"?
That was the main quote. Was he said, "Hey, you look great."
Right. Okay. So Don gets called into the office to essentially to be berated for making such a terrible sexual comment, essentially saying someone looks great. And I think what he was saying was, as we all age, some of us age gracefully, others not so much. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And I think he was making that comment. And once again, and there's, I guess, Don and Karen would be in my generation. Once again, I mean, I'm the guy that, matter of fact, you make fun of me because when I interviewed your friend Camelia Peterson, I said attractive young lady. Okay. Call me an old dude, but if I see someone who is 90 years old and they're an attractive elderly lady, it's coming out of my mouth. You know what I mean? I'm just saying that.
And let me interrupt here too, because Karen Foss's reaction was, Karen Foss explained that after Don Marsh got the axe, Karen Foss said, "Look, at our age, when we see somebody our age and they look good, we start by saying, 'You look great.'"
Exactly.
And Brett, my old college roommate was in town 2 weeks ago, who I hadn't seen in years. And the first or second thing out of my mouth after calling him a son of a gun and using vulgarities was I told him he looks great. And Brad, I'm 46. So like when I see somebody I haven't seen in a while that's middle-aged like me and they look good, I tell them, "Hey, you son of a gun, you look great."
Well, when I'm 88, and when I see somebody I know that's actually alive, I say they look great. So
most of your friends are pushing daisies.
Right.
Now, on the St. Louis Public Radio website, they did a deep dive on this, Brad, and all the troubling comments that he made. One of the other troubling comments says, "Do you remember a guy named Bob Duffy?"
Rings a bell, but I couldn't put my finger on it.
He's a reporter there. He's approximately 185 years old.
He's older than me.
And he had done a story, and during the show on the air, Bob Duffy had complimented a producer who had done some tasks for him on the story. And afterwards, I'm guessing it's a woman, came in the office, and Bob Duffy gave her a hug. Don Marsh had the audacity to say, "Hey guys, get a room." And that was one of the instances of, very blatant, Brad, and offensive sexual harassment.
And once again, that's just, I mean, among dudes, how many times have you said that? I mean, I've heard that.
And I'm not saying you and I are paragons of political correctness, but folks can go check this out. And folks who might be skeptical should read. The story on St. Louis Public Radio is called "Don Marsh's Resignation Followed Remarks About Women That Troubled Coworkers." So folks can read it, and there are other instances in here that are documented where people felt that, and let's be honest, Brad, we have an older white guy and Don Marsh who's making comments that 20 years ago nobody bats an eye at. And then Tim Eby is in the middle. And Tim Eby is cursed with the fact that he is also an accomplished white man with a high salary, which makes him a target. And, you can't say anything complimentary. Well, you and I have been over this before, Matt.
Well,
chivalry is not dead, and it exists. And in the real world, desirable women notice it, they appreciate it, they value it. But inside the halls of somewhere like St. Louis Public Radio, Brad, it's a sin.
So Don Marsh gets called in the office, gets called into Tim Eby's office, and he's confronted with this. And Don essentially just says, FT, if you know what I'm talking about, and turns around and walks out and quits. And I'm thinking to myself, yay, Don, don't put up with that crap. And once again, this whole crazy thing is like, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, man, if I worked there, I don't think I'd talk to anybody. I just go.
You can't. Because anything you say, Brad, would be a microaggression.
Yeah, if they said, you said, hi, if you're walking down the hallway in St. Louis Public Radio and say, hi, somebody look at you, go, don't make eye contact with me. And I go, well, my comment on that would be, don't tell me when you get M&Ms, they make you take all the brown ones out. You know what the reference there is, don't you?
Yeah, I made it in the Missouri Times column, Brad. And you know why that came to be. Do you remember that story?
No, tell me.
Do you mind if I tell it?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so for folks who don't know, Van Halen had a reputation in the 1980s of being one of those crazy diva groups. And one of the examples that's always used is that in their writer, they said, I believe it was brown M&Ms, Brad.
Yeah,
Not to be confused with Don't Take the Brown Acid.
Right.
But I believe it was brown M&Ms. Maybe it was green M&Ms. And they had a writer in their contract that said that if backstage they needed to have a big giant bowl of M&Ms, and if there were any green M&Ms in there, that they would trash the entire studio.
Right. Then some poor PA production assistant had to go through the M&Ms. First off, I'm thinking to myself, if I were like Van Halen, I wouldn't want anybody going through my M&Ms with their
grubby little hands. People didn't wear gloves back then.
Right.
And Brad, I just looked it up. It was brown M&Ms. But you know why they did that?
Why did they discriminate against brown M&Ms?
No, but the true story. So in his autobiography, which I have behind me, Brad, it's called Crazy from the Heat by David Lee Roth. It's a great book. He pointed out the fact that at Van Halen's concerts, because they were such a huge rock band, they had this huge equipment, Brad. And when they traveled from state to state and venue to venue, they would perform at places where the speakers were so heavy that at some points during the show, the stage would actually crash. So they made it very specific of the exact type of stage setup they needed. The type of, I'm going to use the wrong words here, but the rafters and the support system, because David Lee Roth is jumping around stage the whole time and he's liable to break an ankle. And at one point after the stage collapsed, David Lee Roth said, we've had enough. Nobody actually reads our specifications of what we need for the stage. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put something in there that says we need to have a big bowl of M&Ms, but no brown M&Ms, and we're going to bury it in the concert writer. So what they did, Brad, their logic was when they went backstage in a venue and the first place they go is the so-called green room where they're hanging out, they look at the bowl of M&Ms. And if there were brown M&Ms in there and the people putting together the concert didn't read that part of the contract, if the M&Ms are wrong, the stage setup is certainly going to be wrong. What would they do? Trash the whole thing. So the point is, it got the concert promoters and the venue to actually go line by line through the writer and say, hey, let's set up the stage properly so when David Lee Roth is jumping around, he doesn't break an ankle. That is the story of the brown M&Ms, Brad.
I bet you the contemporary concert boys could tell some stories, right?
I bet they could. I mean, just when you look through the photo section of David Lee Roth's autobiography, which I have, one of my favorite pictures from this, Brad, is it shows him with a live, we'll say, woman in a bikini in Tahiti, and the caption is, "No one packs a canoe like my mom." I don't know. It's very good David Lee Roth humor.
Okay, so once again, you and I feed off each other, and we both got to the point where we were talking about Tim Eby, and we ended up talking about.
You were talking about how Karen Wente can fix ED because she's the executive director, right, Brad?
No, it wasn't Karen Wente. You said it wasn't. What was the different name you said?
Oh, Don Marsh.
No.
I know, I'm joking.
Okay.
It's Gene
Okay.
Evans.
So tell me the Tim Eby story.
Yeah, so I just sent a link to you in your email, Brad, and maybe over break you can take a look at it. It has to do with sovereign immunity. St. Louis Public Radio says they have sovereign immunity because they're technically part of the University of Missouri system, and they can't be sued for defamation.
Yes, and
so St. Louis Public Radio could say horrible things about us.
What he's doing,
and we can't sue him.
He's trying to take legal action against them because of things they said when they essentially fired him. Well, the crazy part of it is they didn't really fire him. They gave him a different job where he had a little office and stuff like that, and he didn't have anything to do.
Yeah, they made it. Well, it's essentially firing. They're making it so uncomfortable, and they actually besmirched him by saying that he is a white man. And Brad, when we come back, St. Louis Public Radio had their St. Louis on the Air feature had a very important thing that I think we should give a little bit of promo to, maybe the first 60 seconds of the next break.
Is that a tease?
That is a tease, Brad. I'm known for teasing.
So for 18 minutes, we talked about Tim Eby, but we didn't.
But you know what? People needed to hear. I feel like as a man that grew up in first and second grade really liking David Lee Roth, I feel like I'm giving a little bit back to David by telling the truth about the Brown M&M story, Brad.
Crazy stuff. Okay, we have to take a break. I got to look at something here. Hold on a minute. Okay, we will be right back.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?